Left-wing hate group that makes the Southern Poverty Law Center look like the Salvation Army viciously attacks Christian homeschool advocates. The war is quickly escalating, my friends. Who will ultimately have control over families and children? Mom and Dad, or the forces of government? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today we're talking with international correspondent Alex Newman about a left-wing hate group viciously targeting Christian homeschool advocates, including yours truly. But first we turn it over to Katie for our top story.
This week on Healthy Republic, crazy California congresswomen use COVID-19 84 to keep the country closed. Plus, a lot of Cortez. Add it all together, and you get a recipe for chaos, masking the tyranny beneath. Let's take a look. That's a whole lot of C's, but certain congresswomen all deserve a whole lot of F's for the way they are handling this coronavirus, because to them, it's all about the P's, the perpetual panic pouring of politics pushed by petulant Pelosi.
As far as the president is concerned, he's our president, and I would rather he not be taking something that has not been approved by the scientists, especially in his age group and in his, shall we say, weight group, what is morbidly obese, they say. So I think it's not a good idea.
You are 80, which is almost 7 years older than the president. Gosh, I feel bad for her poor grandchildren. She probably scolds them all the time while eating her ice cream in front of them, and of course, not sharing, because all for me and none for thee. And it'll be a rough seas ahead if this continues. You know, we wouldn't want Nancy Pelosi to get seasick because she already suffers from a myriad of other illnesses.
We don't have that. We have our own gavel.
Is adopted.
Don't you say anything. But I'll say it all. This is Crazy Town. It's absolute madness, and Mad Maxine Waters of California helps lead the charge.
You know, our governors are under, great stress. And the protests that have been organized, the protests that will trying to intimidate our governors to open up everything, or protests where, the people participating in that should be ashamed of themselves. They should not be encouraged in any way. They should not be encouraged from the top leadership of this country to go out and do that.
Yes, Mad Max. Our governors are under great stress. They're also getting paid, unlike millions of Americans who are temporarily furloughed or outright canned. Just a question. Have you donated your paycheck yet? Since you've been home too, right? Meanwhile, the commander-in-chief, who donates all of his paychecks, says this.
Some governors and some perhaps partisans, maybe for election reasons, don't want to have their states open. And then some shouldn't open them quite yet. They're not ready. They went through a lot and they're not quite ready. But no, we're opening our country. People want it open. The schools are going to be open.
Which one sounds like more common sense? Instead, what Nancy Pelosi and the gang decided to do was come up with another stimulus plan, or freebie finger grab, if you will. The House of Representatives passed a $3 trillion stimulus plan on Friday that was called the Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act, HEROES Act. Just like the other stimulus was the CARES Act. See what they do there with the warm, fuzzy acronyms? How can you deny something like CARES and HEROES?
House Democrats are introducing the HEROES Act, named for our heroes, whose provisions are largely based on the 4 previous bipartisan bills we have passed. The HEROES Act focuses on 3 pillars: opening our economy safely and soon, honoring our heroes, and then putting much-needed money into the pockets of the American people.
If only that was the actual case. But it's not. And it's not enough, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, take it away.
There are some provisions that I agree with, like the state and local funding. Congressman Ayanna Pressley pushed for some very strong protections for incarcerated people. But also, we need to do more. We need to make sure that people get recurring payments, multiple stimulus checks to get through this.
Multiple. As in how many? As in for how much? And who's paying for this? And what are they paying for?
If I go out of my apartment and knock on my neighbor's door and say, what are the top 3 things that the federal government can do for you? What she would say was help keep me in my home, expand my ability to go to the doctor, and to make sure that I can, feed my family with perhaps a recurring payment.
As you see, the mask was clearly a little loose. I could still hear her voice, so that was a problem. Now, per usual, AOC ignores the facts and anything sensical because, as her face states, Medicare for all. Thing is, she doesn't actually care, but she wants it all. That's why I proposed the Tyranny Act, taking your resources and notoriously negating you. Tyranny. In this act, we freeze all salaries for members of Congress after they are deemed unessential. And then the governors who are taking the Tyranny Act to its full extent will also be frozen out because it's still cold in Michigan anyway and Governor Whitmer just needs to cool down. So the HEROES Act passed the House and presumably it will go to the Senate. But one of the most entertaining wordsmiths in Congress, Senator John Kennedy, said the stimulus bill is as dead as fried chicken. And then he spoke for us common people who have been trying to understand what Pelosi is doing.
It's $3 trillion for one thing, every penny of which we would have to borrow. That's $3,000,000,000,000,000,000,000. It's not going to pass the Senate, nor should it. My fellow Republicans in the Senate have tried to see things from the Speaker's point of view, but we can't get our heads that far up our rear ends.
There's an image. Think of all the ice cream up there. And when the Senate doesn't pass the bill in the manner as presented, remember the $3 trillion that's supposed to appear out of nowhere, Pelosi will whine about it.
Oh, you've always asked that question except to Mitch McConnell.
Even though Turtle Mitch says it's DOA, something will happen. After all, they're all politicians and pork's pretty tasty to them. So here we sit. But before I go, I can't leave you without one more C word: collusion. This week we found out Democrat members of the House are saying they may, again, try to impeach President Trump. CNN reported the legal filing by House Democrats wanting grand jury materials. The Supreme Court filing states they seek disclosure to the House Committee on the Judiciary of a limited set of grand jury materials for use in the committee's ongoing presidential impeachment investigation. Ongoing. Who needs actual governance when you can just play a game of ongoing tag? You're it. So when this strategy of giving everyone money to essentially buy votes in November fails the Democrats, it's boomerang back to impeachment. And when the failure of that occurs, then it'll be back to one of the many isms. In the words of one senile Joe Biden, what a bunch of malarkey. Until next time, stay healthy, America.
I'm Dr. Duke, and we're back here today with Alex Newman, our international correspondent. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Duke. Great to be with you.
So you and I are both members of a new organization called PSE, right? Public School Exit. You and I are among the founding members. And let's make sure we name all the founding members. Dran Reese out in California, E. Ray Moore, and who else?
So those are the 4 founding partners, us 4. Dran is the president of the Salt and Light Council. It's a wonderful Christian ministry that works with churches across America. And Lieutenant Colonel E. Ray Moore is the founder of the Exodus Mandate. And so for over 20 years now, he's been advocating that Christians remove their children from what he calls the pagan, godless government school system and get them into the safe sanctuary of homeschooling and private schools. And of course, there's you and I think most of the viewers of the program at least know a little bit about us. So.
Absolutely. And so because of this new venture, a radical left-wing hate group has viciously targeted us. Really interesting, isn't it? Think about the Southern Poverty Law Center, only worse. And that's what you get when you get the Political Research Associates. Tell the audience who these people are.
Yeah, I think you just gave a great description of it. Just imagine the Soviet Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, officially the Southern Poverty Law Center. Multiply the extremism by 100, subtract 99% from the influence, and you get political research associates. It's kind of a fringe, really kooky group. I think even a lot of left-wingers don't really take them seriously, but they are so vicious and so determined. And there's a really funny story that a lot of people from the John Birch Society know, because Chip Burtlett, I think is his name, the founder, was famously poking around in the dumpster looking for secret documents that might prove something that he could say bad about the Birch Society. So it's a very sad little group. You almost kind of feel pity for them, but man, are they vicious and hateful. They seem to especially hate Christians more than anybody else, but also conservative Jews and even Muslims who have conservative theology are not. They're not big fans.
Yeah, Political Research Associates. I love that story. That they were actually, this guy, the founder of this organization, was actually rooting through the dumpsters at the John Birch Society, trying to prove some crazy conspiracies. Pretty crazy stuff. Now, speaking of crazy, the reporter for this organization who contacted you for comment, Chrissy Stroop. Let's show Chrissy's picture there. There's Chrissy. She is a transgender something. She is a man who believes he's a woman. Let's just call it that. And there's Chrissy. She contacted you to do a piece, and she got some feedback from you about what the organization is. In fact, she even said to you before she did it, "You're not going to like this," she said. "You're not going to like what I'm going to do, but I'm going to ask. I'm going to try to be a good reporter and give you a chance to speak." We then, you and I both, gave her a bunch of information which she completely lied about. Tell that story.
Right. Yeah. So Chrissy Stroop, you're right, is a man who somehow has gotten it in his head that he's actually a woman, and it's ironic because he accuses homeschoolers of teaching alternative facts to children. When alternative facts, just the irony was a little bit much. But so yeah, he contacted me in an email and said, "You know what, we disagree on everything, but hey, I'm going to give you a chance to respond." And he asked some questions like, "Are we dominionists?" And I said, "No, we're not dominionists. Don't try to label us. You're just going to look stupid and it's incorrect." Are we exploiting? Some critics might say that you are exploiting the coronavirus to boost your authoritarian homeschooling stuff. And so, you could tell right away from the tone of the email that it was going to be a hatchet job. But frankly, and we talked about this, Duke, a lot of us were really excited about this because we were hoping, hey, maybe some left-wing loon at CNN or the New York Times or something will see this and say, oh, here's a worthwhile story. Unfortunately, the hit piece was so bad and so sloppy and so silly that, I didn't see it mentioned anywhere except Mr. Stroop's Facebook page or Twitter page. So that was a shame.
She also says that Christian homeschoolers are the level of child abuse is so much higher than the normal and much higher than in public schools. How'd you handle that?
Yeah, so that was interesting. And in fact, we do have some data on this exact question. The U.S. Department of Education some years ago did a study, and they found that 10% of children in government schools would be the subjects or the targets of sexual abuse and sexual misconduct by an employee of the government school. And, even the most rabid, unhinged, anti-homeschool fanatic would not argue that abuse levels are anywhere even within that ballpark. I mean, it's not even in the same universe. So that was ironic that Chrissy decided not to mention that in the fake report, but it's no surprise.
Back with Alex Newman to continue our conversation about this really interesting story. So, Alex, we have Chrissy Stroop's hit piece. It is, like you said, it's bad journalism. Everything is conjecture, right? Some people might say there's a growing movement to. She never offers a single example. She cites no evidence. She cites no other authorities. She interviews nobody else about those particular issues, the legitimacy of them. What she does instead is ad hominem attack us. So, for instance, she calls me a right-wing podcast host and a member of the John Birch Society, conveniently overlooking the fact that I have 27 years of college teaching, that I've been doing educational reform for 20 years, completely ignored that as a way of undermining the credentials. What else did she do dishonestly in the article?
Yeah, and I think that's really a perfect example of the level of either dishonesty or just terrible, terrible research. And, I get the impression that Mr. Stroop knows how to do research. He could have always asked if he was really curious. And so I actually reached out to him and I said, Dr. Duke, you said he was a right-wing, talk show host or whatever. Why didn't you bother to mention that he's a tenured university professor in a state university system? Why didn't you bother to mention that he was the academic director of an accredited K-12 school with hundreds of students who are getting a phenomenal education way beyond anything the poor victims of the government school would get? Naturally, they did not reply. But, I mean, there's really only two options. It's either dishonesty or incredibly sloppy work. I mean, all you had to do was go to any search engine in the world, type in Duke Pesta, you would have gotten 100 results talking about who you are. So something is very fishy, and I think that really illustrates just the terrible quality of this so-called article, and it's filled with things like that. I mean, it just makes blatantly false claims. It says that public school exit is just the rebirth of a secretive movement that's racist and patriarchal that wants to destroy public school. So I wrote and I said, do you have a shred of evidence? Did you know we have a multiracial board of directors? I mean, what do you say for yourself when you say something so idiotic? No comment, of course, and his editors also didn't have any comment. But what we did in our response, Duke, was just take down, we had to choose a sample of the dishonesty because it was so much. I mean, we would have spent 2 years answering every sentence line by line if we were going to expose everything. But we chose some of the most egregious examples and just listed them and then responded with the truth. So terrible journalism. I mean, I wouldn't even call it journalism. It was more like I called it in my piece, the unhinged ramblings of a madman who has a really vicious and potentially even dangerous hatred of Christian.
Well, let's go back to the picture, Mike, of Chrissy Stroop. And I'm going to say this because I think we have demonstrated that it's true. The fact that she did not get back to you, we graciously, even though we knew she was going to write a hit piece, we graciously responded to her. We gave her adult answers. We encouraged her to ask questions. He to ask questions. He didn't do it. And so what you see here, and then when we did follow-ups to try to ask why you ignored this obvious information, he had no response. And so we find ourselves in a situation now where, tell me what if the following characterization is obviously true. There's Chrissy Stroop. We have a clearly confused individual. We have a failed journalist. We have a dishonest broker. And we have somebody who is disingenuous to a T with her politics, his politics. He is what I would call a major left-wing concern troll, right? His assumption is that the homeschools have all the power and the public schools are the minority victim, right? He writes his article as if homeschoolers, all 3 million of them, have all of this control, have all of this authority, that we have all of these dark money resources that are systematically undercutting the public schools. Meanwhile, the 60 million strong public school system, who takes huge amounts of our personal revenue to poorly educate kids, they're weak, innocent victims of this smear campaign.
It's a total reversal of reality, Duke. I mean, we're referred to multiple times in the piece as authoritarian, which is really interesting because actually the first world leader to go after homeschooling was Adolf Hitler, right? The National Socialist authoritarian. And it's interesting because, we're referred to as authoritarians, and yet here is Mr. Stroop advocating the exact same kind of policies, philosophy, worldview as Adolf Hitler, as Chairman Mao, as Vladimir Lenin, as Joseph Stalin, all these other actual authoritarians who believe in the state über alles, right? The state should supplant the role of the family, the role of the parents in educating and raising the children. So it's a total reversal of reality. And frankly, I feel really a lot of sympathy for this guy. And I hope viewers will pray for him. He's very confused, obviously. He seems to harbor a lot of anger and bitterness. And so, I hope he gets better. And it's unfortunate that this didn't spark any more interest in public school exit, because I think we have something important to say. But hey, we'll keep spreading the truth, and hopefully Mr. Chrissy Stroop will come around.
You keep writing the stories, guys. Keep writing your left-wing stories, and we'll keep tearing them down. Thanks, Alex.
It's time for some real education. The Holy Sonnets, also known as the Divine Meditations or Divine Sonnets, are 19 poems written by the English poet John Donne. Several rhythmic and structural patterns in the poems, as well as the inclusion of couplets, suggest that Donne most likely borrowed his poetic form in these works from Shakespeare. Donne's religious and love poetry place him as the central figure among the metaphysical poets.
John Donne is one of my favorites. He's a contemporary of Shakespeare, born about 1572, died about 1633, and he's one of the most original, unique, and baffling poets in the history of the world. Some of his images are just so beautiful and so complicated that I really find that teaching John Donne to undergraduates is as good a tool to teach them how to read as anything I know, because it does require a tremendous amount of concentration. It requires these elaborate, we call them conceits, right? These elaborate imagistic conceits are complicated. And we know that, as I know as an English teacher of 27 years, the hardest thing for kids to read is poetry, which is why they should read more of it, because it makes them better readers overall. And it's also ironic that one of the things that Common Core did is eliminate almost all poetry from your kids' education. So if you wonder why your kids can't read, if you wonder why reading scores are so low, this is the reason. But to turn to the poem, this is one of my favorites. It's done at the end of his life, recognizing that his death is to come. Here's a guy, John Donne, that was so obsessed with death that a few months before he died, he actually commissioned an artist to come to his house, and Donne had himself, an undertaker, wound him up in his burial shroud. And he laid there with closed eyes and his hands closed across his chest, and he was painted to replicate what he looked like when he would be dead. He then took the picture of himself dead and put it above his bed every night he went to bed. He saw that, and it kept him in mind of his soul, of God, and the transience of life. But the poem itself is one of those poems that's really deeply invested in the idea of God has to help me because I'm so weak I can't help myself. The poem begins like this. He actually begs God to batter his heart down. Batter my heart, three-personed God. That's the Trinity, right? Batter my heart, three-personed God. For you as yet, but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. That's gorgeous. You know, God doesn't forget about us, even if we turn our back on him. But he will never force himself on you. That would be to override your free will. But God will, Donne says, he'll knock gently, he'll breathe on us, he'll shine occasionally, he'll seek to mend. And why? Batter my heart, three-person God, that I may rise and stand. Overthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. It's just gorgeous, right? The force. I need you to force it. And again, if God were to force Donne to be a better person against Donne's will or without Donne's asking, that would be an override. But here's Donne in his wisdom begging God, literally, to let me suffer a little bit. Bring me suffering that takes away my earthly desires. Use your force to break, blow, burn, and make me anew. I'm like an usurped town, a town that's been taken over, to another due. I labor to admit you into my heart, but oh, to no end. Reason, God, reason, which is your viceroy in my choices. It should defend me from the snares of the devil, but it is taken captive, and it proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and fain would be loved back. I want your love, God, but I am betrothed until your enemy. And notice the image. Take me to you. Divorce me. Untie and break that knot between me and evil. Take me to you, God. Imprison me. For I, except that you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor will I ever be chaste unless you ravish me. And you're right about that closing line. Donne says, I cannot possibly be chaste unless you force yourself to make me so. And I'm using my free will to request that. Very interesting theological poem.
And that's going to do it for today. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Now, before we go, we're going to wrap things up with our fun fact for the family. Did you know that German chocolate cake is actually named after a guy named Sam German? It's actually not from Germany. So he may have been an American or an Englishman, we don't know. But in 1852, he invented a sweet baking chocolate for Baker's Chocolate Company. They named it after him, German's Chocolate. And in 1957, it actually became uber popular when a homemaker published the cake recipe in a Dallas newspaper.
Is that the one with coconut in it?
Yeah, there's some coconut.
That's not for me. And that's going to do it for us this week. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.